I used to be someone who took chances without hesitation or fear. At 22, fresh out of university in Halifax with a French literature degree and no practical plan, I bought a one-way ticket to France with almost no money. My mother thought I'd lost my mind while my father said nothing, which meant the same thing in his language. I went anyway because something deep inside me needed to discover what I was truly capable of when no one was watching over me. I ended up in Lyon instead of Paris because Paris was for tourists and dreamers while Lyon felt like real French life happening all around me. I keep telling myself I should have spoken up earlier. But then again, maybe everything happened exactly when it was supposed to. At 63 years old, I've come to believe that timing has its own kind of wisdom, even when it feels cruel at first. My name is Margaret Doyle, and for the past 4 years since my divorce was finalized, I've been slowly learning how to take up space again in my own life. It's harder than it sounds when you've spent decades making yourself smaller so someone else could feel larger. The habit becomes invisible until one day you look in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back at you with tired eyes. I stayed in Lyon for 8 years, learning the language the only way that truly works, through survival and daily necessity rather than textbooks. The woman at the morning market corrected my grammar while selling me overripe peaches with a smile. The regulars at the Bouchon, where I waited tables, teased me mercilessly until my Lyonese accent became natural and effortless over time. I didn't just learn French, I absorbed its rhythm, its music, and its soul in a way no classroom could ever teach a student properly. Then I met Robert, a civil engineer from Ontario, on a 6-month contract, and everything in my life changed forever. We fell in love at a terrible gallery opening where he whispered that he had no idea what the painting meant and suspected no one else did either. I laughed so hard the owner glared at us with disapproval in his eyes. He extended his contract twice and eventually asked me to come back to Canada with him when his time was up. I said yes without hesitation, packed up my little apartment near Lyon, and left behind the adventurous version of myself who had built a real life in a foreign city. I became Margaret Doyle, wife, mother, and suburban woman whose biggest adventures became Saturday morning farmers markets in Ontario. Claire was born 2 years after we returned to Canada and settled into our new life together. She grew up knowing her mother had lived in France, but it remained a vague family story, interesting in theory but never deeply explored by anyone. I never pushed the subject, and she never asked many questions about my past adventures overseas. The years in Lyon started to feel like they had happened to a different, braver person than the woman I had gradually become over time. After 31 years of marriage, Robert and I divorced, and I found myself alone in a two-quiet house in Guelph, quietly disappearing from my own life. The engagement weekend at the cottage near Huntsville was supposed to be a chance for both families to connect properly for the first time. Luca's parents, Helene and Philippe, had flown in from Brussels for 2 weeks to meet our side of the family. The cottage was beautiful, right on the water with golden evening light dancing across the lake surface. I arrived to find everyone already settled and comfortable in their places. Helene greeted me with European air kisses and polite warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes, while Philippe shook my hand firmly with assessment. We had drinks on the deck as the conversation flowed around me like a river I wasn't part of. Luca's parents spoke English well, but frequently switched to French when talking to each other or Luca in private moments. I sat quietly listening, saying nothing, because they had no reason to believe I could understand every single word they said about us. Helene commented that the cottage was charming, but a bit rustic for her refined taste and expectations. Philippe agreed, adding that Canadians seemed to prefer nature over real culture and sophistication. The dismissive remarks continued throughout the evening, without any filter or shame. Helene described Claire as sweet but simple in her tastes, while Philippe expressed concern that Luca might have to carry a wife with no real cultural foundation or depth. They spoke freely in what they believed was a private conversation, never imagining that the quiet Canadian mother at the end of the table understood every cutting word they exchanged. I kept my face perfectly composed and my hands steady on my wine glass throughout their conversation. when Claire and Luca stepped away to bring dessert from the kitchen. I finally spoke up in clear, fluent French with my distinct Lyonnais accent. I told Philippe he might be underestimating the value of roots you cannot immediately see or understand. The silence that followed was absolute and deeply satisfying for me in that moment. Philippe's glass stopped halfway to his mouth while Helene turned toward me in slow motion, both of them stunned into complete silence. I looked them directly in the eyes and told them I had lived in Lyon for 8 years, not as a tourist, but as someone who had worked, survived, and built a real life there from nothing. I explained that I understood everything they had said about my daughter being simple and about me having no real cultural foundation or depth. I wasn't angry with them, I told them calmly, but I wanted them to know their judgments were based on incomplete information and unfair assumptions about us. Claire returned with dessert just as the tension reached its peak, and she sensed something had shifted dramatically in the room. She looked at me with the slight narrowing of eyes that means she is trying to read a complicated situation she doesn't fully understand yet. "Everything okay down there at your end of the table?" she asked with genuine concern in her voice. "Yes," Helene said. And this time, her warmth was different, less professional and more sincere than before. "Your mother was just telling us about her time in Lyon and her experiences there," Philippe added with new respect in his voice. Claire blinked in surprise and looked directly at me with wide eyes. "Mom, you speak French fluently?" she asked with genuine amazement in her voice. "You never told me you actually lived there and spoke the language so well all this time." I smiled at her and explained that after the divorce, I had put many things away that felt like they belonged to a different version of myself. It felt like bragging about a life that had nothing to do with the one I was actually living at that time in Canada. That was wrong, I think now. Not just impractical, but wrong on a deeper level. I made myself smaller than I needed to be, and then I got so used to being small that I forgot I'd had a choice about how much space I could take up in the world. Claire reached across the table and put her hand over mine with tears in her eyes. The evening continued with a new, more careful honesty in the air between all of us after my revelation. Philippe and Helene began speaking to me with genuine respect, asking about my time in Lyon and sharing stories from their own lives in Brussels. Claire and Luca sat beside us and listened with the slightly stunned expressions of people hearing a language they knew their parents spoke, but had never heard them speak so openly to each other before that night. Late in the evening, when Luca had gone to get more wood for the fireplace, Helene came and sat beside me on the couch with a thoughtful expression. "I want to say something, and I want to say it properly this time," she said in English with sincerity in her voice. "What I said about Claire being simple was unfair and unkind, and I said it in French because I told myself it was private between Philippe and me. But the intention doesn't change the content of those words, and I apologize for that deeply." She looked at me directly and continued speaking with humility I hadn't expected from her earlier. "Your daughter is clearly a wonderful woman with many qualities I failed to see at first. I was making judgments about things I didn't understand yet, and that was wrong of me to do. I do that sometimes when I am nervous in new situations with people I don't know well. It is not an admirable quality, and I am working on it." Her apology felt genuine, and I accepted it with grace and understanding. "Can I ask you something personal before we leave tomorrow?" Helene asked me quietly. "Of course you can," I replied, feeling a new connection forming between us. "Why didn't you say something earlier when you understood everything we were saying in French? You could have stopped the conversation much sooner than you did." I thought about her question carefully before answering with complete honesty. Partly because I was trying to be polite in a way that Canadians often are, perhaps too committed to avoiding conflict at all costs. But partly because I've spent 4 years letting things go by that I should have spoken up about much sooner in my life. I've been so afraid of being too much or too demanding that I became too little instead. I'm 63 years old, and I've lived in Lyon and raised a remarkable daughter and survived a difficult marriage. I think it's time I stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. Helene was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that stayed with me long after that night. My grandmother used to say something in French that doesn't translate perfectly but roughly means a woman who has made herself invisible to keep the peace has given away the only thing that was truly hers to begin with. Your grandmother sounds like someone I would have liked very much, I told her with a warm smile. She was formidable in her own quiet way, Haleen replied, looking out at the lake with nostalgia in her eyes. You remind me a little of her actually, she added thoughtfully. The evening wound down slowly after that conversation, the way good evenings do when real connections have been made. Claire made tea for everyone, and Luca found a card game none of us were especially good at, but we played anyway. At some point, Claire looked at me across the table with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in a long time, something between pride and wonder at who her mother really was. The look she used to give me when she was 8 years old, and I did something she hadn't expected from me. Before I drove back the next morning, Luca walked me to my car with a serious expression on his face. I wanted to say thank you for last night and for what you said about Claire, he told me quietly. She didn't need me to defend her because she would have defended herself perfectly well if she'd known what was being said about her. I know that, I replied with a smile, but still thank you for being there. His parents are good people, he continued. They just sometimes need a door opened before they can see what's on the other side of it. You opened a door last night for all of us. Your mother opened it herself, I told him gently. I just knocked on it firmly enough for her to hear. He laughed softly, and I liked the sound of it because it was genuine and warm. On the drive home along the 400 with the Saturday morning traffic thinning out, my phone lit up with messages from Claire. She sent a string of texts that began with "Mom, you have been holding out on me for 30 years," and ended with a voice memo of her attempting to say something in French and getting it almost entirely wrong in a funny way. Philippe sent a very formal and sincere email apologizing properly and mentioning the name of a restaurant in Lyon that he thought I would enjoy if I ever returned. Haleen sent a short direct message in French inviting me to Brussels before the wedding, because Luca's grandmother was 91 and didn't travel but should meet me. I read all the messages while sitting in a Tim Hortons parking lot outside of Barrie with a medium coffee going cold in my hand. Then I thought about the woman I'd been at 22 who had bought a one-way ticket to France with very little money and no guarantees. She hadn't gone anywhere after all. She'd just been waiting patiently for me to stop pretending she no longer existed inside me. I texted Haleen back in French and told her I would be delighted to come to Brussels. I would like very much to meet Luca's grandmother, and if she had recommendations for where to stay, I would be grateful, because I hadn't been to Europe in over 30 years. Her response came back quickly with a list of 3 hotels, ranked by preference, and highly specific notes on each one. I laughed out loud in the Tim Hortons parking lot, startling a man walking past with a box of Timbits in his hands. I sat there for another minute, looking at my phone and feeling something I hadn't felt in years. I felt ready to live again, as the woman I had always been before I learned to make myself small for other people's comfort. I finished my coffee, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove home with a new sense of purpose and peace. I had a passport to renew, a suitcase to find, and a daughter who wanted her mother to teach her how to order food properly in French before the wedding. I was already looking forward to every moment of that journey with her. Thank you for listening to my story of quiet strength, reclaimed dignity, and the courage to speak up when it matters most. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life stories. Tell me in the comments if you've ever had a similar moment where you finally spoke your truth. Where are you watching from today, and what would you have done in my place? More empowering stories are coming soon with love and respect.